Hi, welcome to Board Gems, my regular video series in which I go over older board game gems. The board games tend to be 10 years old or older, and the game I'm covering this time is a game that had a 10th anniversary edition quite recently, so it definitely fits. Now, if you are a regular viewer of Board Gems, you probably get an idea of the type of game I like and the type of game I don't like. The type of game I like usually has simple rules, doesn't have a massive deck of cards with like crazy combos and stuff, and it's just simple rules, and the rules melt away, and it's interactive, you're playing with the other players. Not so much this game, but I like this game a lot, and I did want to talk about it because of the 10th anniversary edition that just came out recently. It's a good time to talk about Ascension. Now, Ascension, this is the 3rd edition. There have been a number of printings. So this is the 3rd edition, and then we also have the 10th anniversary edition, which is on the top there. So that's the one this is the one that came out recently. It was designed by Justin Gary and was published originally by Gary Games, his company. Gary Games became Stoneblade Entertainment, and I believe Stoneblade Entertainment was then bought or merged anyway with Ultra Pro, and it originally came out in 2010. This is important because it's a deck builder. The original deck builder, or the one that started the whole trend of deck building, was Dominion, which I think came out in 2008, and it wasn't too long after Dominion came out that we started to see a few of the sort of the initial wave of deck builders following in Dominion's footsteps. Now, I don't know how much Dominion influenced Ascension, because it had been, like, when Dominion came out, I know that people would say, oh, it took the deck building part of Magic the Gathering and made it in its own game, and that was considered novel. But Ascension, this card game, was designed by Justin Gary, who was a Magic the Gathering player, and a notable one, at least won a fair bit of money in tournaments. And it's quite possible he had the idea himself, and or that Dominion at least showed that there is a market for this deck building idea. So instead of Dominion having a random set of cards that's available to everyone, Ascension has a relatively unique deck of cards. There are some duplicates, but not many. And there's a constantly rotating set of cards that you can choose to buy on your turn. And so when you buy one, then that empty space is going to be replaced by another basically random card. And so each player has different options available to them. And sometimes the cards are going to fall your way, sometimes they won't. Ascension is not as strategic a game as Dominion, but it's good tactical fun. You know, what's the best thing I can do for this turn? And it will be the best for me going forward. But then next turn, I have another decision to make, right? Cards may not be the same. Another game that I would like to compare Ascension to is the DC Comics Deck Builder. Now, that was the first. I assume there are many more. I think the Street Fighter one, and there's like a whole bunch of others that are the same idea and has the same as Ascension. It has the same idea of a pool of cards that you can buy, and that pool is constantly changing. The DC Comics Deck Builder is actually even more simple than Ascension, because Ascension has 2 currencies, and that one only has 1. And the 2 currencies, while it can make for even more kind of randomness, and, you know, more of a decision to make on your turn, whereas I find that the Cerebrus Engine deck builders, which are the DC Comics ones, obviously seem to be influenced by Ascension, but even more simplified with just a single currency. Those play, to me, a little bit obviously. And so I prefer Ascension. This is really not my normal style of game, right? It has a massive deck of unique cards. You want to get cards that kind of interplay with each other and stuff. It is the app that made me fall in love with this game. And of course, I own the game physically now, but if it wasn't for the app, I probably wouldn't. And it's the app and playing it literally hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of times made me really fall in love with this game. I'm going to show you how it plays. I'll talk later about why it's a gem, and then afterwards we'll probably do some expansion talk, because there's like a dozen expansions for Ascension, and it's worth talking about which ones, in my opinion, are worth it or not, based on my own preferences. To set up the game, place the board on the table between the players. Give each player 8 apprentices and 2 militias to form their starting hand. Any that are left over, so if you're playing with few players, you just set aside and not use during the game. There's 3 cards that are always available. One is the heavy infantry here. One is the mystic, as well as a cultist. There's just the 1 card for the cultist, and the cultist always stays there. Gems, which represent honor, or the victory points in the game. The white ones are worth 1, the red ones are worth 5. You're going to count out 30 per player and place on the side here. You can of course play to whatever total you want, but the rules suggest 30 per player. And of course you can make change anytime. Then you're going to have the general deck of cards. You're going to shuffle up the deck, and then you're going to reveal 6 cards in these spaces here. The rest can go on this space here that says deck. Players shuffle up their starting deck of 10 cards, and will draw a hand of 5 cards to start the game. Pick a start player, play as clockwise. A player is generally going to play all of the cards in their hand. They don't have to, but any cards they don't play during their hand get discarded. In typical deck building fashion, players are going to have their deck of cards. They're going to have their hand, of which they play whichever cards they want, and then optionally can purchase cards, which all go into a discard pile. Then they draw 5 more cards into their hand. On their next turn, they may buy more, play them, go into the discard pile. Then when their draw pile runs out, they will shuffle up their deck. So any cards that they purchased in the previous turns may come up in their hands in later turns. Draw 5, and they're ready for their 3rd turn, and so on. The game will end when all the honor is depleted. Players will be scoring, gaining these honor tokens, their victory points, and the game will end when this pile runs out. You still finish the rounds, everybody has the same number of turns, and then players are going to total up all their honor, as well as the victory points on their cards. The starting cards have no victory points. Victory points are shown here, but the cards that you can buy, you'll see have a victory point total here. In Ascension, there are essentially 3 different types of cards. There are monsters, there are heroes, which may have what's called a faction next to it, and they have constructs, also with perhaps a faction next to it. For this basic game, without the expansions, the factions don't come into play very much. You don't have to worry about it too much. Heroes and constructs are cards that you can purchase. This number in the triangle is how much it costs to buy the card. The game calls them runes. I guess it's like a magical currency. So for example, on my turn, if I play these cards, you'll see the apprentice will give me +1 rune. I have 3 apprentices in my hand, so I can play these cards and buy a card from the board of value 3. So these are all not available to me. They're too expensive. I could buy this card for just 1, or I could buy these. So for example, I could buy a mystic. The mystic costs 3, but if I play it on my turn, I will gain +2 runes, so it'll be easier for me to buy cards on later turns. Now you'll notice there's a number here in a red circle, and that's another thing that you collect on your turn, which is power. Power is used to defeat monsters. So you can see there's 2 monsters here. Unlike the heroes and the constructs, these do not go into your deck when you pay the cost. Instead, you get their benefit, which is called the reward. You get that immediately, so you follow the text, and then the card goes away. We say it goes into the void. Anytime a card is removed from here, of course, you will replace it with a new card from the deck. So the void is essentially a general discard pile. Monsters can go in there, but also cards can be banished. We haven't talked about that, which is just you can banish a card and it goes into the void just like a monster would. Whenever you play a hero from your hand, you will get the power. So keep in mind, if you buy this card, you do not get its benefit immediately. It goes into your discard pile. On a later turn, if you have it in your hand, you get to play it, and you get to, when you play the card, you execute the text. You gain power just like you do runes. I have in my starting hand 2 militia, which gives me +1. I can also buy heavy infantry for 2 runes, which on a later turn when I play it will give me +2 power. For runes and power, as you use them, you spend them. And you do not get to keep these currencies for your next turn. You gain everything, in this case 3 runes, 2 power, to spend however you like in whatever order you like, and then all the cards, including any cards that you purchased. So let's say I purchased this Arha Initiate for 1. We immediately replace it. And I have 2 runes left. I will buy a heavy infantry for 2. Now I have 0 runes left, but I still have 2 power. It's not enough to defeat these monsters, but that's where the cultist comes in. The cultist is an always available monster. When you defeat the cultist, it does not go into the void, it just stays there. So if there are no monsters available and you have 6 power, you could spend them to defeat the cultist 3 times and get the reward 3 times, which is just a single point. And as you get points as rewards, or as part of the powers of a particular card, you will draw them from the pool of victory points there. The last type of card is the construct. And you can see there's 3 constructs available here to purchase. Constructs go into your deck just like a hero. But unlike a hero, in which on your turn you play it, gain its benefit, and then you will discard it at the end of your turn, constructs stay available in front of you. So if I had this Snapdragon, if I drew the Snapdragon into my hand, then on my turn I would play it. I would immediately get the benefit shown, and on a later turn, the card stays there. It doesn't go into the discard pile. Sometimes monsters, you can see this one, the Corrosive Widow, gain 3 points. Each opponent must choose and destroy a construct they control. So you can have, of course, multiple constructs in front of you. I could have these 3 constructs all here, just sitting in front of me, giving me benefits. But then you defeat this monster, and according to the text that gets executed, I now have to choose one of my constructs to destroy. And a destroyed construct goes just into the player's discard pile. Again, note that the heroes and constructs have victory point values, which for any player who has these in their deck or hand or in front of them as constructs at the end of the game will score those victory points. It is nice to note that mechanic constructs are a little bit special. Usually their ability is not that great, but the advantage is they are worth a lot of victory points. Especially near the end of the game when you're buying cards, but you won't necessarily care so much about what they do because you're not going to necessarily see them again by the end of the game. You may be buying these cards just for the victory points. And the mechanic constructs are the most valuable. They have the best rune to victory point ratio. The game continues until the honor pool is depleted. So all these victory points are claimed. You still finish the round, and you will have spare victory points left over that you can use in case players score points after the pool is depleted. If the players still score points, they still get the points, but the end of the game is triggered. You just take it from the extra. Finish the round, and then players will total up all their victory points, plus the values of any heroes and constructs they possess. Could be in their hand, could be in their draw pile, could be in their discard pile, there could be constructs in front of them. Total up all those points, and the player with the most points wins. That's it. You're ready to play Ascension. This isn't a typical board gem, is it? It's not the type of game that I usually like to highlight on the channel, the games with simple rules, with the depth of play, with the interaction with the other players. Ascension doesn't really have any of those. It has this big deck of relatively, unique cards, which is usually not something that I enjoy. Like stuff like Terraforming Mars and stuff with a big... No, I don't like that stuff. But the app is, for my money, it's the best board game, or in this case, card game, app conversion adaptation that you can get. There's lots of board games that have been turned into video games, I guess, usually apps on, tablet or phone. And you have a lot of them that really try to, they use the board game as the base, but they redo all the art. Maybe they put in a 3D space. I know Tokaido did this, for example. And just kind of video gamify the experience, right? And while I'm sure that's fine for a lot of people, I find that it personally, because I'm coming at it from the board game point of view, I already know Tokaido. And I want to play the board game, and then what I get with the app is sort of a video game. And I know it's Tokaido underneath, but, because you can't see the whole board, you're kind of zoomed in on a particular thing, and maybe you can look around a little bit. There's a way to do that, but you have to learn how to do that. It's a fancy thing, which probably a lot of people appreciate. I don't. I prefer when the board game gets adapted, so if you're familiar with the board game, it's just exactly the same. So much so that you could learn the board game from the app, because it's exactly the same. All the art is the same. All the, where everything goes is the same. Small World is a great app that way. It doesn't change the art. The art's great already. And it has a board that is represented on the screen. And, you're dragging the tokens, say, onto the board. And it's the same deal with Ascension. It is a great, smooth playing app. It's very clear what's happening all the time. But you can see, okay, this is getting banished, so the card spins and goes into this area, which is the void. I'm drawing this, and it's going on to my starting deck, my draw pile versus my discard pile, right? And everything is in a certain place, and it's an app rendition of a physical space, if that makes sense, as opposed to making kind of a virtual space in sort of video game form. It's just trying to recreate that almost 2D experience as much as possible. The early versions, actually, including the 3rd edition, actually, I believe, were all done by an artist by the name of Eric Sabe. Now, if you look at the art for the very first edition of Ascension, it's going to be divisive. Some people are going to like it because it is a very unique style, but it's not something that I would personally describe necessarily as professional. Eric Sabe is an extremely talented artist, especially compared to somebody like me who doesn't have an artistic bone in their body. His art style back then reminded me of, if I think back to high school, the most amazing artist student in my high school, right? They'd be doodling in the margins and just making, maybe like full page illustrations, just incredible detail. And you think, wow, that guy's really talented, right? But it still feels like high school doodles. Does that make sense? In the original illustrations, in some cases, you can see these little horizontal lines going across the image. And it's like, wait a second. Did this guy just draw did this guy draw this big illustration just on regular, what we call loose leaf, just regular, lined paper? And, color it in with colored pencils or whatever, and then, and they making this game, they're like, great, we'll zoom in on this part for this card, on this part for that card. It's what it looks like. That's the first edition. And definitely Eric Sabe's artistic style has gotten a bit easier to digest as the editions grew. He seemed to specialize in drawing on black, so it does create kind of a, to me at least, a unique style. He definitely has a unique style, and it lends itself to the atmosphere of Ascension, and it helps make the game unique. I think even if art is a little bit weird or unique, we'll say it that way, it helps make that game that contains that art stand out a bit in the crowd. Now, having said that, on the top we see the 10th anniversary edition, and that looks like, to me at least, completely different artwork, completely different art styles. And so it looks like they're getting away from that sort of thing, going into more what I would call a more, maybe traditional is the wrong word, but a little bit more what people are expecting from a fantasy card game, that style of art. About the new edition, one thing that's I think is important, is that's why it's a great time to talk about this, because I would actually avoid the older editions of Ascension and go with the new one. The cards have been rebalanced. You can playtest and playtest as much as you want, and eventually you narrow down on the costs of everything and the victory point values, and then you put it out in the wild and people play it, and you start to see automatic purchases, like that thing is really cheap for this early in the game because it allows me to banish cards or whatever. Trim your deck is a common deck building thing. And so over time they started to, with the expansions, and they're standalone, most of the expansions are standalone, they kind of changed their idea of what some of the balance should be in terms of the costs and the victory point values. And this 10th anniversary edition is them going back to the original base game. The balance of things have changed a little bit. So I'll give you an example. There's a card that allows you to draw 2 cards into your hand, but then you must banish one. Doesn't have to be one of the 2 you drew, but a card in your hand, you have to. It's not optional. Now, that can be a bad thing if your deck is already trimmed and, everything you get is good. You're throwing away victory points necessarily. But early in the game, it's fantastic. And it was worth 4 runes in the early editions, and now it's worth 5. Right? There was a monster, Samael's Trickster, which was 3 power, and it used to give you 1 victory point and 1 rune. Which is, better than a cultist, but it's also more expensive than a cultist. So it wasn't really much better than a cultist. So they changed it, the most recent edition, 2 points and a rune. And those balancing things that they did, to me, they work great. And that's why I'm actually really excited about this newest edition of Ascension. It's got the rebalanced cards. It's got new art, which a lot of people, I would guess, will probably prefer. So I really like this new edition of Ascension, and I would recommend it for anybody who's interested in Ascension. But before you go out and buy Ascension, you should, first of all, get the app. Buy the app. Just the base game is fine. I forget how much it costs, but it's reasonable. And play it. And see if you like it. It's very easy to learn the game from the app. But also, you might find that you prefer to play on the app. Ascension is not that great a multiplayer experience. It's fun. I assume there's a way to play solo. I never looked into it. I'm not a solo gamer. As a 2-player game, it's great. But every other player you add to that is basically just going to add more time. And, the cards in the middle are going to change more by the time your turn comes around again. So there's even less planning than the game would normally have, which is not a whole lot. If you think you're going to play it a lot 2-player, it may still be worthwhile to get the physical edition, but you may be perfectly happy to just play the app. And, the expansions are cheap on the app. You buy the expansion. Certainly trying the expansions on the app is a great way to inexpensively see if an expansion fits you. So the app is a strong recommendation. And if you're like me and you end up playing the app hundreds of times, basically, you may end up going, I think I would like a physical copy of this. I would like to play with other people, like, at a table. And because you can play the app online with other people too. You need a special account. I think I have one, but it's lost. It's probably forgotten the password a long time ago. But even just playing solo against the AI is still a really fun and rewarding experience, especially if you throw in a bunch of expansions. So try the app first, and then decide whether you buy the physical edition. You may find the app is enough. And if you find after many plays you're interested in the physical copy, great. But yeah, I strongly recommend getting the 10th anniversary edition with the rebalanced cards. I have to throw out several negative things here. And how much they're negative, really, it depends on you, okay? None of these things are deal breakers for me. They're just things that you should be aware of going in. For one thing, Ascension is not a strategic game, I would say. Dominion, in my opinion, is much more strategic because everybody has the same cards and those cards stay out and you can plan for later on buying this card or whatever. And because the cards are constantly changing in Ascension, you can't really plan that way. The decisions you make are for now. You certainly can't say, oh, in 3 turns I'm going to do this. No, that's basically impossible in Ascension. You're buying what's available to you and, oh, that's good, or that's what I want, that's what I want to do. This will help me banish some cards in my deck, thin my deck a little bit, I'll do that. Maybe you have a play style and you're choosing which cards to buy based on your play style. But again, yeah, it's more of a, what do I do right now, with no long-term planning involved, but very little even medium-term planning. Is mostly just all in the here and now. And the game isn't really all that interactive. There are some monsters that require, if you defeat a monster, you can force your opponents to destroy a construct. And very, very few of them are targeted, which is probably a good thing, I guess. Usually, take that, people don't like so much. But yeah, you're just racing to get points, right? You're playing your cards, you're buying the right thing at the right time. Sometimes those decisions can be almost automatic, right? If there's a lot of monsters and there's one card that you can buy with runes and it costs 5 and you have 5 runes, you're probably going to buy that card because sometimes it's like all monsters and sometimes it's all heroes and constructs. So you can't build your deck, really. Like I've seen people, and they'll do something like, like maybe in a 2-player game, one person goes with a heavy rune strategy to buy cards and constructs, and another person goes all in on power so they can defeat monsters. And so you're kind of tailoring your deck to one of the two. Actually, that's a terrible idea. Don't do that. In fact, it's a very easy trap to fall into early in the game to buy up heavy infantries. There's more heroes and constructs in the deck than there are monsters. So after you start defeating the monsters, they'll usually be replaced by heroes and constructs that require runes. But you can't change gears. If you bought lots of rune cards, like mystics, that's great. You're getting lots of runes. You can always buy heavy infantries later to add more power to your deck, but you can't really do the reverse. If the starting cards, the apprentices, if they get spread out too much in your deck because there's too many things that generate power, then you draw your hand up, okay, 6 power, 2 runes. What if there are no monsters? Okay, defeat the cultist 3 times, but you have 2 runes. What can you buy with that? You can't buy a mystic. That costs 3, right? Another heavy infantry just makes your deck worse. It is a trap that sometimes people fall into, especially if there's a lot of monsters initially in the game, that people buy up a lot of heavy infantries, but then their deck is kind of forced down that route, and it's usually not a good long-term strategy. There is that one pitfall to point out. Of course, it isn't easy enough to learn, but it's a painful experience if somebody goes down that path. Now, the new edition did kind of rebalance some cards, which is good. I will say that if you look at the broad library of Ascension content, balance tends to be all over the place. There are some cards that come up that are just automatic purchases. Like, don't even think about it. going into the game, you have to be aware of that. Not just being tactical, but also kind of being a little bit of a wild ride, right? So this might sort of sound like a negative review. And certainly if I only played it a couple times in person, maybe I'd be like, it's fine, and not really think about it much anymore. I will say that playing the app hundreds of times, maybe thousands of times, because it's an old app, has really given me an appreciation for the game. I have this old iPad, okay? I think it's iPad mini, and it's like second generation or something. Almost nothing runs on this iPad anymore. Even browsing the internet is hard if you're going to one of those sites that has a lot of things going on. Ascension plays smooth as silk. It's basically my little portable Ascension player. It's a great app. What can I say? Download the app, try the app, and try it for yourself. It doesn't cost a lot of money, and maybe you will fall in love with Ascension just like I did. And now it's time to talk about expansions, because just like many deck builders, you want expansions for variety. You are going to get tired of the base game pretty quickly. You'll want to buy expansions, but which one? There's like a dozen. All the expansions, as well as the base game, they all have the same back, but sometimes the color shades are a little bit different. Sometimes the card shapes are a little bit different. In fact, I have a few expansions, they're all combined together, and you can't riffle shuffle. I usually riffle shuffle. And I can't because the cards are all different sizes. So, very frustrating. Some integrate better than others, and that's what I want to focus on with this part of the video. My goal, when I built out my Ascension set, is I really wanted to get expansions, but I didn't want to buy everything. For one thing, the box wouldn't hold it. I still wanted everything in a single box. As a result, I had to be choosy with which expansions to get, because some expansions / standalone games are great standalone, but they do not mix well with other expansions. So my goal, my personal goal when building out my set, was to only pick expansions that merge well with other expansions and with the base game. So if I say that an expansion doesn't really mesh well with the rest of the cards, like the other expansion sets, that doesn't mean it's bad, but you may just want to play that standalone. The early sets, they would alternate having a big set and a little set. And the idea was that you could buy the big set, you could play up to 4 players, it comes with a board and everything. And you could buy later on a smaller set, which out of the box you can play no board, but you don't need a board in this game, and enough pieces to play just 2-player. But then you can combine them and play up to 6. So pretty much all these small box expansions work well with the big box that preceded it. It's considered kind of an extension of that big box. So Return of the Fallen, which is the second set, is that to the base game. It's an extension, and you could buy Return of the Fallen and just play it by yourself, 2-player, with a friend, but you can combine it with the base game. Combines really well. It only introduces one mechanism that I recall, and that is the idea of fate. Just some cards have a little black box on them, and when they appear in the center row, you stop the game and do what it says. So it was like a little event, basically, that happens. I would personally be a little reluctant to buy it now because they have not redone that one. All these early ones, they're going to be in an older art style, and the balance might end up being a little bit different than what Stoneblade would do now if they were to make it now. And if you don't want to miss out, because maybe they just will never reprint some of these, yeah, you can certainly go ahead. The expansion does mix in well. I ended up keeping Return to the Fallen for mine as an expansion to the base game. Now we have the third set, which is the first big box expansion slash standalone for Ascension after the base game, which is called Storm of Souls. It has actual event cards, so when you need to refill the center row and you flip over the next card and oh, it's an event, so put it to the side, it stays in play, and now the rules change slightly. On top of the cultist, they added something called a fanatic. It still is only 1 point. It costs 3 power instead of 2, but when you pay for the fanatic instead of the cultist, you put one in front of you. The game introduces the concept of trophy monsters, which are monsters you defeat, but they don't go into the void, they go in front of you, and give you a benefit if you choose to spend them at a certain time. And the fanatic is one of those. Every event has a special ability that can be activated by the fanatic. Sometimes it is true that you have 3 power and you just don't know what to do with it, right? You know, if you have 2 power, you can kick the cultist. If you have 4 power, you can kick the cultist twice. What do you do if you just have 3 power, right? So 1 power is wasted. The fanatic does allow you to do something with that extra power. So yeah, it's a perfectly fine expansion. Okay, 4th set, Immortal Souls. Now again, this is a little mini expansion. 2 players, you can just play by yourself or with a friend, 2-player game, but you can combine it and it works really well combined with the previous big set, the Storm of Souls. Immortal Heroes introduces one main thing, and it's a weird thing, all right? And that is the idea of soul gems. So basically what they did was they took the old art that they had already since, I think, moved on from and replaced, but they still had those old art. What do we do with it? Well, put a filter on it, and then have a small deck of cards to the side for a random benefit. You might play a hero that says gain a soul gem. You have a deck of soul gems that are shuffled at the beginning of the game. You draw one, it's a random benefit. And these are all powers that are from base cards from the base set. And you might have just something like draw a card. But you might have one that says draw 3 cards, right? It's a very big difference. There are other advantages to the set. So for one thing, it comes with a deck of placeholder cards. I don't know, there's 20 or something. Placeholder cards that you can add to your Ascension deck. So even though you don't have 20 events, you can put a whole bunch of these placeholders and mix them all in with the deck. So there's more events that, you know, the events are more likely to be drawn, and just have the event deck on the side. So then you draw the placeholder, go, oh, it's an event, and now we draw from the event deck. So it helps the events merge a little bit better in a bigger set. And of course, it does introduce more events. If you look at pictures of the early sets, they have a particular frame, right? So there's the art, and then there's the name, and then there's the box that says what it does. And they changed that in later editions. Well, they never changed this one. Actually, if you play it on the app, you can play it with the updated frames, but I don't think Immortal Heroes has ever had a printing that had the updated frames. So they're all of the super old style. So for that reason alone, I'd avoid it, just because this doesn't look great. The Soul Gem thing is a real take it or leave it thing. I'm personally not a huge fan. That's an expansion that I did not keep in my big set. So Rise of Vigil is another big set. So standalone, plays up to 4. And the main thing is, this is the biggest difference now from regular Ascension, is a concept of energy cards. So now a lot of the heroes and the constructs and even the monsters have the regular ability, but they also have an extra ability, maybe an extra powerful ability that you use if you have a certain amount of energy. Energy is a third currency that they've added to the game. Like the others, they go away. Whatever you gain on your turn goes away at the end of your turn. There are cards, really easy addition actually. There are cards that just say gain 1 energy and draw a card. And you start with 1 in your starting hand. When energy appears in the center, you keep drawing until you get a non-energy card, and all the other energy cards stack underneath it. So when you buy that top card, all the energy that was under it, you get that. That's how you gain energy. And it's interesting because it makes some cards like really, really powerful. Because like you buy that card and maybe it's just okay, but you're gonna get like 4 energy, you know, at the same time. So it's a really neat idea, and I really enjoy playing it on the app. I don't have a physical copy. The reason is because it really doesn't mix well with other sets. The problem is that the number of cards that can use energy gets diluted. You know, if you have a big deck, you could play through much of the game and not even see one. So gaining the energy is not as important, not as fun, not as exciting. So I would personally avoid that expansion as part of a larger set. But you can just own that alone. Like if you don't want to be bothered with too many expansions, there's some people who are like, I want to buy this game, but I don't want to be tempted with like a million expansions, and then I'll have this big massive set, and I don't want that. I just want to have this, maybe one expansion, and then I'm good. You may want to consider Rise of Vigil, because it's a really, really solid standalone set that just unfortunately doesn't mix all that well with the other sets. Set 6, Darkness Unleashed, same deal. It's a continuation of the previous big box one, Rise of Vigil. It's just more of the same, basically. It does introduce dark energy cards, which is basically the same as energy cards. But if you're going to go with Rise of Vigil, absolutely get Darkness Unleashed and combine them into one set. You can play it to 6 players. Don't play it with 6, but you could play it with 6. And it's a great standalone set, and you won't be tempted necessarily to get a bunch of other sets to add to it. Rise of Vigil plus Darkness Unleashed, I would say probably is one of the sets to get if you don't want to be, if you're not like me and you don't want to be tempted by having a giant deck of crazy cards. You just want to keep the set relatively small and not be tempted by expansions. Consider that, Rise of Vigil plus Darkness Unleashed. Okay, set 7, Realms Unraveled. Now, to a lot of people, this is one of the, if not the best expansion sets. And the reason is fairly simple. It merges extremely well with pretty much literally any other set. The main mechanism is just that there are cards that have multiple factions. The main other thing is I know it does also have transformation cards, which are kind of neat. And Rise of Vigil had these as well. There are some cards in Rise of Vigil that if you have a certain amount of energy, you get to transform them into a better card. And Realms Unraveled does that, but without using energy. So there'll just be some condition, right? It's like if you have this card, it's pretty basic, but if you have 2 Mechanic Constructs in front of you, you get to immediately transform this into this other thing. You have the concept of Unite and Multi-Unite. So Unite is a thing, I think they even introduced it basically in the first base set, the original set, which is that if you've played a card of this faction already on your turn, or even later, then you get an extra benefit. So it encourages you to play cards of the same faction. Especially Multi-Unite, which is the same idea, except, like for example, the Matron of Discovery gives you 2 runes, but every mechanic card you play on your turn will add an extra rune to that. Or every mechanic hero, I suppose, will add an extra rune, and if you have like a deck with a lot of Mechana cards, Mechanic heroes in it, it just becomes ridiculous. 12 runes or something, you can do whatever you want. So the cards with Multi-Unite, the cards get crazy overpowered. So yeah, okay, balance issues, but I will say it does make the game a bit more exciting, a bit more fun. Realms Unraveled is a great set, combines with literally anything. You can get almost any set, and you're like, which set do I add to it? It's just go ahead, add Realms Unraveled. It works with anything. The next one is Dawn of Champions. The main thing is it introduces some great context to the game, because it adds the concept of a champion. So this is a little mat that goes in front of you. You have basically an extra currency, but this is one you do keep from turn to turn, which is, I think, reputation, they call it. Everybody has a champion, and every champion is a particular faction. And the idea is every time you buy a card or defeat a monster, because some monsters can have factions now, every time you do a thing with a center card of your faction, you gain reputation. And you can just buy reputation outright. The idea is once you get a certain amount of reputation, you get your champion. It's an extra card that goes into your deck usually pretty good. So it gives you some context. It encourages you to buy cards of a particular faction and to stick with your faction, because you get the champion, and then eventually if you keep getting reputation, eventually you get cards. You can get cards just automatically. That's the rally mechanism. It'll say when it executes, but it'll always be like when a card is removed from the center. If it says, for example, Rally Enlightened, when the next card comes up, if it's of that faction, so in this case Enlightened, you get it automatically. If you can get your reputation up to 8, which is the maximum, then you're always rallying your faction. It's a continuous rally, so you could get super lucky and just keep getting the cards of your faction over and over and over again, and it can be a huge number of points. It's fun, it's exciting, it's a way that people who are falling behind can catch up, so it doesn't really bother me all that much. It is super swingy, though. That probably is not going to be for everyone, but again, it mixes really, really well with the other expansions, because just any set you have, you add a champion to it, and you add the rally mechanism and the constantly gaining reputation, and it adds some context throughout the game. So it doesn't feel as much like a turn by turn by turn, I'm doing this, and then on the next turn I'm doing that, and next turn, right? It gives it more of an arc. It gives you more of a thing that kind of spans the whole game that you're building towards. So another strong recommendation for Dawn of Champions. And what are we on? 9. Now we're getting weird. So now we're entering the Dreamscape. Now this is the first of 3 sets that introduce a new currency called Dreamstones. I forget what they're called, actually. There are cards that say Dreamborn, and whenever you acquire one, you'll get some of this currency. In this set, you have your own very small personal deck of Dreamscape cards. These are special cards. They don't get mixed in with the rest of the set. They're separate cards. They're either events, they give you a one-time benefit, or they're heroes or constructs. And they stay in a separate pile. The currency it introduces is one that builds over the course of multiple turns. It's not like the regular ones that just go away. And so you can buy cards from your personal deck to add to your, either to execute if it's an event, or to add to your regular deck of cards. Works great. Alone does not mix well with the other expansions. None of them do. But, and I'll come back to this, there's 3 of these big box sets that involve the Dreamscape mechanisms. They're great if you combine all 3. So we'll talk more about the Dreamscape expansions. Number 10, War of Shadows. This was my biggest disappointment in all the expansions I've played. There's 2 main parts to the game. Now every card in War of Shadows is light or dark. It's just a part of the border. When you have the 6 cards kind of face up in the center, you count how many are day and how many are night. And if there's more day than night, then it's daytime. And if there's more night than day, it's nighttime. And different cards, like heroes, for example, when you play them, or monsters when you defeat them, may have an extra benefit if it's done during the night or during the day. As you can imagine, does not mix well with other sets, because you might not get any day or night cards for a while. And so it's just always like, I guess, dawn or dusk or something is like always like in between. The other thing that kind of makes it stand out is that there are cards that cost both runes and power. It's just a personal opinion. I'm sure they play tested this a ton, but the balance of the costs of those cards felt really, really off to me. And so I was actually really disappointed with War of Shadows. That did not make the cut for my personal set. 11, Gift of the Elements. This is one of my favorite expansions, and is as good, perhaps maybe even better, than Realms Unraveled as a great set to mix in with other sets. First, we have a mechanism called Empower, which just allows you to, when you acquire a card, to immediately banish a card you've already played. So it's like you're upgrading that card to the new card. It's not hard to learn. It's easy enough to play with. One thing I really like about Gift of the Elements is it comes with I guess they're like gremlins, or maybe they're goblins, monsters. You defeat one of these monsters, you choose another player, and you put it in their discard pile. Then later on, when they're playing, they're drawing cards, they might get a goblin. Playing it does nothing. It's just a dead card in their hand, right? So if somebody's in the lead, those gremlins come out, you can defeat them and send them into their deck, kind of slows them down a little bit. Great addition. Obviously adds a little bit of interactivity, a little bit of take that, but it's not super painful. From memory, the expansion also includes a lot more cards that are of low cost monsters. Like there is a monster that only costs 1 power to defeat, and more heroes and constructs even that have just a cost of 1 ruin. So it's a really, really great addition to a big set. Just adds a ton more variety. I'm a big fan of Gift of the Elements. Valley of the Ancients. Some really great cards in there, and most of the cards alone would probably mix in pretty well with the rest of the sets. There are 3 places of power. There's Castle Grayskull, there's Snake Mountain, and I forget the other one. No, anyway. Some of the cards give you basically +1 to like a life currency, or +1 to like a death currency. And these are each tied to one of the places of power. These are cards that allow you to claim the places of power. And if you own a place of power and you get one of that currency again, you get a special benefit. It could be, for life, I think it's 2 runes. For death, it allows you to banish a card from your deck. And it allows you to grab the 3rd place of power, which is, so there's 3 places of power which are potentially rotating amongst all the players, and they're worth points at the end of the game. It reminds me of Rise of Vigil, and that it's a great mechanism that doesn't work in a bigger deck. It's a fine set standalone, or mixed in with 1 or 2 other sets. So for example, you could do Valley of the Ancients and Gift of the Elements, and you got a great set right there. But if you're thinking of getting more and more expansions, that's one that's going to get diluted. And so if you're looking to make a big set, I would personally skip that one. Number 13, we're back to the Dreamscape. This is Delirium, just more Dreamscape cards. There isn't a personal deck anymore. Instead, they now introduced the Delirium die, which is a random benefit, like the Soul Gems, I guess. A random benefit that you can spend 5 of your Dreamstone money things to roll the die, and you get a random benefit. Maybe you can banish a card, maybe you get a bunch of ruins, maybe you get 5 points, right? It's fine. I don't have a strong complaint about it. Again, it works fine alone, and it works fine merged with Dreamscape. And the next one. All the dreamy ones together. Combines well. I don't really have anything super negative to say about it, other than, again, doesn't mix well with the other sets, but if you combine it with other dreamy sets, it's great. And number 14, Deliverance. That's the 3rd, and at least for now, final dreamy set. Actually, the previous 2 do not mix well with bigger sets, because it's too hard to gain these dream money. This one, Deliverance, it has a very simple thing, which is part of your starting deck. It's just like the energy in Rise of Vigil. Get 1 dream coin, whatever it is, and draw a card. So you're always able to get this dream currency, even if the Dreamborn cards aren't coming out. Because of the extra starting card that you start with, now you can gain this dream money regularly over the course of the game, and you always have things to spend it on. So if you have Dreamscape, you have your Dreamscape deck that you can buy cards from. If you have Delirium, you can spend 5 to roll the Delirium die, get a random benefit. So there's always stuff you can do with your dream points. So those 3 sets, Dreamscape, Delirium, and Deliverance, all combine really, really well together. So that's another option. If you don't mind a little bit of added complexity, because it's more currencies you have to kind of deal with, It is a great standalone combined set. So get those 3 sets, combine them together, it works great. And here's the thing, because there's so much of the Dreamscape cards, there's 3 big boxes, big sets full of these Dreamscape cards, you can combine this with all your other sets to make this huge, massive deck if you want to. Because there's enough Dream cards in these 3 sets, they're not as diluted if you're playing in a giant set, right? As long as you still have the Delirium die, you still have your Dreamscape cards that you can choose from at the beginning. So it doesn't really matter whether they come up or not. You still have the initial card in your starting hand that gives you the Dream points. Then with all of these together, you can combine them with any other sets, and it works great. And of course, it works great as a standalone as well. I mean, standalone with the 3 of them all together. And Deliverance is the coup de grace. It's what makes the set. So that allows you to combine everything together very easily and also combine with other sets. Do not play Delirium or Dreamscape with non-dreamy decks unless you have Deliverance. So in that sense, it's a must-have. It does add, because it adds that extra currency, I decided not to go with any of the Dreamscape cards, any of those 3 sets in my big deck. But if I was to expand it further, I would get all 3 of those. Maybe have those in a separate box. And so if I'm ever tempted, I could combine them if I wanted to. That is all that's in the app. There are 2 more expansions that I know of, big box sets, and they're the piratey expansions. So what they do, I'm not going to get into them because I haven't played them myself, but they change the board so it's more spatial. That's not going to work with the app, so you're not going to see those sets in the apps. They're pirate themed, so you're going to have the additions of of treasure, and there's like a kraken and stuff. Sounds fun. If you love Ascension and you want some variety, but as a standalone set, that seems like a fine direction to go. You could get Skull and Sails, which is the set 15. And then I think it's just recently they announced set 16, which is a curse of some island or something. And those should combine all together all right, I would think. I haven't played them myself. That's kind of where, I'm kind of bowing out. I'm not going to be able to play it unless somebody buys it or I buy it, and I'm fine with Ascension as it is. So in the end, what I went with my set is this new edition, the 10th anniversary edition, plus number 2, Return to the Fallen, plus 3, Storm of Souls, plus 7, Realms Unraveled, plus 8, Dawn of Champions, plus 11, Gift of the Elements. And that's my giant set. Those all work really, really well together. If you were doing it from scratch, I would be tempted to avoid getting the early expansions, only because, it depends. If you suffer from the fear of missing out, you may want to get them because there's no guarantee they'll be reprinted. But if they are reprinted, those are the ones you'll want to get. They'll probably rebalance them a little bit, maybe, make them look a little nicer. They'll merge in well with the art style of the 10th anniversary edition. Personally, I would suggest you don't have to delay or doubt getting anything from Realms Unraveled onwards. Realms Unraveled, Dawn of Champions, and Gift of the Elements are amazing expansions that work combined with pretty much anything. And then some of these older ones, I would say, are more optional. Realms Unraveled, Dawn of Champions, and Gift of the Elements are kind of more of the same expansions, increase the variety, but it still feels like Ascension doesn't take it too far in any sort of weird direction. Thanks for watching. Remember, older games like Ascension do not stop being good just because newer games come out. Take care.